We're in the studio of Iwan Lewis in Holyhead.
That's right.
Indeed. Talking about the Retake Reinvent project. And the first question, Iwan, is about the artwork that you chose in the podium card.
Yeah.
Can you tell us which one that was and why you chose it?
Yeah. Initially, prior to visiting the museum in Cardiff, I was drawn initially to a piece by René Magritte. However, whilst I visited the museum, I came across this small painting of a pink elephant by David Jones. And immediately, everything else just went out the window. René Magritte went out the window, everything, all my plans, all my sort of structure that was building up in my head. With the original piece by David Jones, this elephant is confined within what looks like some sort of pit, a man-made pit, or possibly like a circus tent or something. But there was this sort of a moral conundrum there, if you like. I almost wanted to set the elephant free within this sort of context. I wanted to shift it and put it back in some sort of natural environment. But as soon as I did this, which is in this piece here, I felt that the tension that took place in David Jones's depiction wasn't replicated in what I was doing. No, I mean, I think initially there was this sort of urge to free this animal from its confines, if you like, and put him in this outside space. Now it's an odd one. It's this sort of, I have a certain sort of resentment for this elephant to a certain degree, and maybe this subject matter that I'm dealing with at the moment of poisoning the poor animal with mango leaves is this sort of this process that I'm going through. But yeah, he is sort of placed in the outside world, and it's sort of, this seems more of a wild creature, a wild animal now, as opposed to a circus act, if you like. Because I found it hugely problematic as soon as I brought it into my studio. Using the animal, for instance, and the exotics, whereas with it being an exotic animal, this idea of the exotic is something I've sort of dealt with in the past when I've worked off Henry Rousseau's images. On one hand, I'm really fascinated with David Jones, and I'm obviously drawn to this sort of his position as an artist, because he's not sort of like widely regarded or anything, and that's something that sort of draws me in.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I was a bit cautious, a bit wary of just celebrating that, if you like.
In some ways, you're trying to get rid of a section of the of this exotic, or something to do with the other.
That's right.
You know.
It is this issue that takes place with the other. At the same time, the other can obviously work as a mechanism to suggest an ambiguous, let's say, direction towards a different narrative that might be something to do with the self or something altogether convoluted. But yeah, this conundrum with the exotic, with the other, it's something that immediately took place with it. I think what I have with Rousseau at the moment is some sort of leftover from what I was working from with him. Because before there was a direct response to Rousseau from what I was doing. Whereas right now, in response to this David Jones, which I'm finding it really interesting actually in the process, is that I'm sort of almost wary of stepping too close, but at the same time, clearly it's informed by this sort of exotic landscape, whatnot, sort of farcical sort of exotic landscape, similar to sort of Rousseau's work. But there's a pulling of multiple artists at the same time, so I'll be looking at René Daniels and various other people simultaneously. but I have in the past directly worked from thinking about Rousseau. But when I was directly working from thinking about Rousseau, it was more to do with thinking about Rousseau's psychology, if I'm honest, rather than his actual paintings. And so then I started thinking more about the space that the elephant is in within David Jones's piece, sort of confined, sort of isolating space. So then I responded by, for one example, with this piece, which sort of emulates, if you like, the negative space of his piece. But then I've removed the elephant and replaced it with a figure, with a human figure. But there's a certain distortion to the human figure in it, in the fact that the clothing sort of suggests a new form, like that. And then with this piece, it's almost sort of a self-portrait, if you like. But as well, at this point, a certain thinking of a narrative starts to pull in, of drawing my own sort of storytelling, if you like, from the back of this image. Yeah. Well, for instance, stylistically, I mean, this image here is I'd regard as sort of overly stylized, almost caricatural-like. It sort of, at this point, I was also looking at a lot of comic books and graphic novels, and prior to it, which would be this for me. Although I feel it's sort of a finished piece. There's a lack of risk in it for me in this piece. The idea of risk is I'm always sort of dabbling in this area of failure, and I often feel that if I'm not on that sort of fringe between sort of failure and sort of just scraping something, then I'm failing. You know, I think the risk for me is in what you were saying, in stark contrast in taking that leap from the sort of image making onto a completely and entirely different sort of way of working from it, as a sort of a way of exploring, if you like, and trying to find some other new process that will give a reading that I'm sort of surprised by, if you like. Because if that element of surprise isn't there for me, I tend to sort of, in the process of making, I tend to sort of lose interest really quickly. They both have completely different handling of paint to each other. As in economically, this one's sort of far thinner, far looser sort of application to this piece here, which is built up over time, and I think there's about 3 other pieces underneath that, which I often work in that sort of way. And yeah, I think an issue that I'm having at the moment is this sort of exterior space that I'm looking at, that I've sort of stumbled into, if you like, from reacting to sort of David Jones' piece. Although they're both clearly sort of landscape sort of referencing, there's this sort of line cutting across here for me that's sort of suggesting that I'm sort of wishing for something else to intervene. So yeah, they are this whole body of work. It is at a sort of an early stage. Although I do feel that this piece here is sort of I regard it as sort of finished. I think this is a really early stage. I mean, I think it's so far it's about 3 days old or so. There's other pieces behind it, sitting behind it, because there's obviously there's lots of texture taking place. Yeah, and with that texture as well, it's again what I was saying before about process, in the sense that sometimes that texture isn't welcomed as much, whereas other times there's not that much you can do with it because it's so sort of thick. But yeah, with this, I'm in this sort of stage of putting on and taking away at the moment. So I'm trying to sort of collect, if you like, this sort of colourful palette, but there will be a point very soon where a lot of it will be sort of cut off, and there will be more structure, I should imagine, to it. Whether the subject matter in it, that the figures taking place again, and not happy with it, but it seems to be quite familiar in that he does look a little bit like me again. He has a beard and a balding head at the moment. I'm aiming to get rid of that at a certain point because I want to remove myself from it. I don't want to be so vividly in it. But I'm interested in this arm, in what this gesture that this arm is doing. It's sort of almost emulating trunk of this elephant. So it's almost a sort of a Frankenstein thing going on with it. It's in that it's sort of becoming the elephant or something.
I guess titles are quite important for the work in that case.
Very
for you.
Yeah.
And are you thinking about titles as you're going along?
I do.
Almost.
Yeah. Yeah. I do. I mean, quite often the work can be very narrative led, in that a certain sort of fictional story might come to mind whilst I'm making something, which took place with this one in particular. But whereas with the other previous one that we were looking at, with the diving board image, it sort of stands alone, if you like, in that it acts as a filler. And the titles are very important in my work. They act as a sort of a tool to offer another reading, if you like, of the work. It sort of adds another level, or adds another layer, I should say, and changes possibly the reading of the image. With this piece, I started thinking a lot about the colour Indian yellow, which is one of my favourite colours to use. There's not much of it on this piece, but there's quite a bit here, which is sort of right in the centre, bottom centre of the image. And there's a sort of there's a sort of a fictional story, if you like, on the back of Indian yellow that relates to elephants and water buffalo. That it was thought in the past that Indian yellow was the result came in the result of elephants being force-fed mango leaves, and then from the back of that they would produce this pigment that they would concentrate from the urine of the animal. At the same time, it was a period where I was looking at watching Holy Mountain, the movie Holy Mountain, and thinking about the symbolisms within that, within the sort of the tarot taking place within it and all this. But I didn't want to specifically point at any direction with that film or anything, but it was sort of the visual language, that visual landscape that was offered that was more interested in, this sort of psychedelic sort of place. So then the imagery sort of responded to that, if you like, and removed itself from the imagery of David Jones's piece. It became far more garish, and yeah, it sort of sits in a completely different environment. Towards an end of producing a body of work for me, editing is crucial, and sometimes editing means actually destroying the work and just picking out individual pieces that read well together, that sort of creates some sort of coherency. The thinking throughout it is linear to a certain degree. I mean, there's certain questions that I ask, whether it's in the narrative that I'm interested in, whether the narrative is ambiguous or not, it doesn't matter. But in that editing process, towards the end, I aim and I try to sort of lock it all together. But also I tend to sort of focus in on individual pieces that have a certain quality in the painting, in the way it sits on the canvas, and I'll sometimes sort of emulate that again over and over, or sometimes I'll sort of break it up and fracture it. It's difficult. It's all, there's complete chaos, but at this point in time. But yeah. I'm hoping I'll be able to draw it all in. But the editing takes place within a visual mode, but also in in how they sort of respond to each other in the grand scheme of a narrative, if you like, and that narrative can be completely open. But I almost like to think of them almost as still shots from a film, from a movie. When you have a still shot from the film, there's it's removed from sort of the context of that picture, and it's isolated because there are elements to it that I really like. Colour-wise, it's foreign to me, and its palette. With oil, there's a certain sort of richness to the colour that I feel is sort of difficult to sort of emulate with certain other synthetic paints. But not only that, it's just something that's really familiar to me now. I've been using oil for years now, and I love the fact that I can mix wax into it and the other substances that come into use, like stand oil and things like that give you a completely different finish, whether it's sort of really glossy and sort of really glossy, or whether it's completely matte from using the wax in the paint. It's that sort of constant sort of juggling with it that I really enjoy, and then sort of prizing out sections or fragments, that come in between colours that sit next to each other. Yeah.
Kind of thing for you. Do you see a studio as a kind of sanctuary?
Yeah. I mean, it does function as a sanctuary, but at the same time, I don't know. It's a tricky one. It's a place I use for working. I feel it's working and thinking. It's not. I don't feel like it's a relaxing environment in any shape or form. But without it, I'd go crazy. I think, and I'd get severely frustrated. Studio is integral for me in the ability of being able to shift things out. I mean, I deal with objects and making stuff, so I have to have that sort of room to be able to sort of negotiate with, if you like. Also, right. It's an environment that's sort of useful in sort of considering what the works will look like once they've left, your studio space into a gallery or whatever it is.
Where does your inspiration come from?
It's tricky. I love looking at other artists' works. I love seeing new artists, seeing what they're doing. I love trying to get a grasp on what's happening in the art world, but also film, music. It all sort of get melted together, if you like. It's detached from myself, the stuff that I'm inspired by, but at the same time I digest it through who I am, if you like. So it's not always digested in the correct way, because I sort of misread things as sort of embraced quite often.
And what do you like about working in North Wales?
North Wales as a place to sort of work from is completely different to where I've worked from in the past. I was based in London for years, in East London, and here there's real silence and quietness, which is, although I'm from North Wales, is kind of almost new to me, that sort of silence. But at the same time, it's good because there's a good contrast between being able to visit an exhibition and then go back to this quiet place, quiet space where you can sort of think about it within your own head. You can almost dislodge yourself from these sort of galleries and these sort of environments that are more bustling, if you like, within sort of art terms.
And do you care where your work goes after it leaves the studio?
you've seen, you know, your work, once you've spent your time doing it and editing it down and sort of thinking it over, you want your work to be seen by an audience. So I'm constantly in this place where I'm re-evaluating what I've done prior, whether it's sort of, oh, I wish I was doing that again, or I wish I never made that. You know, that sort of thinking always takes place. There's also sort of detaching myself, if you like, and almost emulating a different viewer and sort of considering, you know, what comes across without knowing the stuff that I know in my head that I'm attaching to the piece. It's a strange process, but I think it's integral to sort of.
Is there anything else you'd like to say in relation to the project or the studio or your working process that you'd like to share with us?
Yeah, I mean, I just like to emphasise really that this, so far this work, I do feel it's in a sort of a, not, I wouldn't say a completely early stage, but it's certainly not entirely resolved. But at the same time, I think that this is the point that I always crave to get to. You know, this sort of this place of serendipity, but at the same time, it's chaotic. But I had to sort of create mud to be able to sort of like fix it, if you like. And I feel like I'm in that place right now. Also, I think it's I think I'm trying to sort of push my whole practice into a sort of slightly different sort of area from the back of this project. I mean, that's something I do all the time anyway. After I've finished a series or a body of work, I try to sort of move on to a next phase. But this, although it's familiar in many ways, a lot of the stuff I'm doing, it's kind of exciting, you know, colour-wise and everything that's happening at the moment, and quite excited by what's happened from the back of this project.
Well, thank you, Iwan, very much for letting us into your studio.
Thank you, Andrew.